Hey everybody, welcome to the 7th episode of my videos. Again, don't really have a working title right now. I know I just use my name. I don't really have a fancy username or cool name like, whatever. But I just use my name. So I guess this is just my experiences with toys and things of 80s, my childhood, and all that stuff all together. Eventually I'll kind of try to pull this into something a little more coherent, but for right now it is what it is. So today I want to talk about, and before I get going, this is probably going to go 2 episodes easily, but try to get it in. I had some notes going, and I had to edit them because the notes would have been an entire week. And there's a lot of stuff that I could cover on videos all to themselves. They just kind of relate to this topic. But today's topic is going to be Dungeons and Dragons. I know it's popular right now, because of Stranger Things, and I know a lot of younger people are playing. A lot of people are just playing it in general ever since, the big thing that happened. So, it got popular. I read somewhere that they did more sales. Wizards of the Coast did more Dungeons and Dragons sales in 2022, I believe, or 2021, than they did its an entire existence since the 70s in 1 year. It's pretty crazy. So apparently it's popular. I kind of jumped back into it myself, and so did my son. I'll kind of get into that, but well, let's cover my beginnings with it, because Dungeons and Dragons is probably, next to Star Wars, probably one of the most, and comic books, one of the most influential things on me as a child growing up in the 80s. The 90s, I'll get to the 90s later. 90s was a weird time. I was in my 20s, so the 90s was kind of, I'll get to it later. Let's just put it that way. But and getting back into D&D in the 2000s, that type of thing. Actually, kind of late 90s, 2000s. But let's start from the beginning. For me, I started with Dungeons and Dragons in 1981. I don't know if I saw a commercial, or if it was just the talk of the town, or I might have seen something in the store, or saw something at the library. But I remember one person in particular, a kid in 3rd grade. I'm not going to, I guess I shouldn't name names in this, because these people might not want to be name dropped, but there was a kid in my 3rd grade, and he came to school with a sandwich bag filled with little pieces of paper all cut out, and he laid it out on the table there. We had time between different subjects where we could just do whatever in 3rd grade, and he kind of spread the stuff out on the table, and he started talking about it, and he kept saying Dungeons and Dragons. And I guess I must have heard of it at the time, but I was like, oh, what is this? So he kind of went into this tirade about it, and then I remember, I think the next thing that came across my path is I was at the Rochester Public Library, and I used to love this is the original Rochester Public Library, not the new one that they built they built it in the 90s. I want to say like 92, 93, somewhere around there. Maybe 91, I can't remember. The old public libraries, it's been a lot of things. There was a furniture store. It was I don't know what it is now, yoga studio, I don't know. But I loved the old public library. It was right next to the Rochester Park. And it was very easy to go through the park from my subdivision to go right up to the library. You didn't really didn't even have to go on a main road except for one road. So it was pretty accessible, easy to get to, the walking distance. It was right around the block from my school. Loved the Rochester Public Library, loved it. But at that time, I was kind of sneaking upstairs. So downstairs was like the kids section, young adults or whatever they want to call it. But they had the kids section downstairs, and then upstairs they had the adult section where all the adults hung out. A lot of old men reading newspapers. So I would go up there occasionally because they had this big wall of science fiction and fantasy novels. And I used to just I just scan the shelves and just look at all these covers and just be amazed. You know, in third grade, I'm 8 years old. There's also the time, again, I don't want to really dwell on this, but this is right at the time when my parents were just about to be separated. And I was looking for anything to keep me occupied. You know, it wasn't going to be school. I needed something to latch on to, and at this time I was kind of drifting as far as my interests as a kid, because the Star Wars craze was sort of over for me anyway. Of course, you know, 80 was when the Empire came out, and again, I talked about it in my Star Wars video. Empire was a gray area for me, and so Empire wasn't doing it at the time. Star Wars wasn't doing it at the time. There wasn't really a lot that I remember really clinging on to, and you know, it had TV shows like the Dukes of Hazzard. I was really into cars. There's a lot of car heads in our neighborhood and stuff like that, so I really kind of thought that was cool at the time. But you could only get, I mean, it only goes so far. I mean, you couldn't drive a car as a kid. You could have toy cars, you know. You could look at people's cool car, you know. But it was kind of an adult thing, you know. As an 8-year-old, it was just a passing thing. Oh, the cars are cool. I got some toy cars. I got the Batmobile. I've got, you know, I don't think Knight Rider was out at the time, but I got the General Lee from Dukes of Hazzard. So I didn't really have anything at this time. And again, it was a rocky situation at home, so I needed something. And I remember going to the library a lot, kind of my escape area. It wasn't school, but it was enough of cool things that weren't at my school. I mean, they didn't have those cool fantasy novels and stuff at my elementary school and media center. So I would go there and look at the stuff, and then I ended up coming across the Dungeons and Dragons hardcover books. I've long since I'd say I didn't long since get rid of mine. I've sold off. I bought them back like in the 2000s, late 2000s, and about 8 years ago I ended up getting rid of almost everything on eBay. I just needed some money, and that stuff was it was worth something at the time. I'd probably get more for it today. And I don't really want to go back and rebuy it all. You know, I just look at it, and it's still 3-4 times what I even sold it for. So I'm not paying all that money to get something back I should have kept. There's a lot of things that you should have kept, and I got rid of a lot of things. But going back to that public library, so they had all the books. However, you couldn't check them out. They were all reference books. You could use them in the library, but you couldn't check them out and take them home. But there's a caveat to that. The reference librarian said, well, you know, you can go up to the reference window where they had like the periodicals and stuff, and you can get a pass that lets you use the Xerox machine. What's a Xerox machine? As my 8-year-old brain thought. You know, it's 1981. They said, oh, it's a copy machine, and you could make black and white copies of anything. I'm like, really? Well, that's insane. Mind blown. 8-year-old mind blown. So I said, what do you mean a pass? And they said, yeah, you go get a pass, and you can make 10 free copies a day of a reference book, because you can't check it out, and you can keep the copies. It's free. Okay. She says, otherwise, it's a nickel. I think it was a nickel at the time. It was 5 cents to make copies downstairs at the regular copy machine. But upstairs, the reference copier was free, because it didn't have a change machine on it. You just hit the big green button. And they said, well, somebody will help you with it too, because, you know, I don't think they wanted 8-year-old kids messing with this, you know, probably $5,000-$10,000 machine back in the day, because it was fairly new technology. So I went over to the reference counter and I asked the lady, and she said, "Oh yeah, come over and bring the book that you want, and I'll show you how to use it." So she showed me how to use it. She says you get 10 free copies now, no more. That eventually kind of was a gray area because there's nothing to stop you from just hitting the button again. And as long as you weren't breaking anything and weren't causing a commotion, the reference librarian, whose desk was right behind the machine, they after a while they trusted me, so kept adding a couple more copies than 10 copies. But here's the thing. I printed it out myself since then. Here's the Monster Manual, original Monster Manual. This is from a PDF. I just printed it out, made this cool thing out of a binder. This is what I should have done then, but I didn't think about it, and, color copies, that's a whole different situation. But this is what I should have did when I was a kid, but I didn't. I kind of did it the goofy way. Not the goofy way, but just the crappy way. But I went through as a kid, and I started with page 1, and I don't know how many pages were there, 100 and something, 160, 170? Maybe not even that much, maybe 100 pages. And obviously 10 copies a day, 100 pages, it's going to take me 10 days to copy it all, unless I hit that green button a couple extra times. But anyways, I went through and I printed this out in my printer, but essentially I did the same thing. It wasn't this, I had the crease of the book, I was just getting used to the first few pages looked like junk. But I started copying all the pages of the Monster Manual. I loved the Monster Manual. See, the player's handbook, I didn't really understand at first. Didn't understand what it meant. There's pictures in it, but I wasn't the best reader back then. And I just took what is this? Oh, it's a bugbear. Oh, these are statistics. What are statistics? Didn't even know what that word meant at the time. What's an ligament? That's alignment. Oh, okay. Intelligence? Yeah, what's that? How smart the thing is, unlike myself at the time. Armor class, what is that? Hit dice, what do they speak of? So I started learning about Carrion Crawler. I started learning about all this stuff. And it was primarily the art, the pictures. And I redrew hundreds of these drawings. I've redrawn them probably hundreds of times in notebooks. Again, anything I can doodle on. I drew all these little pictures lots of times. I'm trying to flip to the dragon section, just because probably the biggest thing that caught my eye as a kid outside of the red dragon was the chromatic dragon, which of course everybody knows is Tiamat. Even says it right there, Tiamat in parentheses. That came into play a little later, but I just thought it was cool. What's a chromatic dragon? He's made out of chrome? Well, actually, I didn't barely knew what chrome was, because I knew my bike was chromed, but barely knew what chrome was at the time. But anyway, so I spent days, I don't know how many, copying every single page of this book, and then when I got them all together, I had to figure out what to do. At the same time, I had like one of those chip clip binder things that the reference librarian gave me, because I bring my copies back with me, so I'd keep them all together. I wouldn't just copy them and run home. I'd always bring everything back with me, and then she gave me those clips to put on it, and then I wish I would have thought of this as a kid, put it in a binder. I don't even know if these plastic sheets even existed back then. They might have. I'm not sure. I know binders did, but I don't know about the sheets. I know they had a 3-hole punch right there at the reference desk. I could have just and put that in there. Actually, you know what? I think I did do that at some point. I think the librarian told me to do that. Why don't you put hole punches in it? And I did. And I don't know if it ended up in a binder eventually, but that was my Monster Manual. And then I went to, they had deities and demigods. I haven't printed out a new deities and demigods. I've gotten rid of my old one. But I printed it out just like that one, so I had all those characters. I was really obsessed with folios, which gets to the Fiend Folio. Gets to, all of the different collections, catalogs of creatures, monsters, characters, everything. I just loved that as a kid. I love cataloging things. Cataloging what different classes of different monsters and creatures and all that stuff. And that was pretty much what the Dungeons and Dragons was. Now I still haven't started playing the game yet. I still didn't know the rules. I'm still just learning these things here and there. But I had the books copied. There was a game store, and it wasn't just a game store, it was a hobby shop downtown Rochester at the time called Trackside Hobbies. And most of it, since it's called Trackside, most of it was like slot cars, radio control cars. I had a radio control helicopter back in there, blew my mind back then, because that wasn't common back then. And it was astronomically expensive. But anyways, the very front of the building had all the like Dungeons and Dragons. They had eventually a couple other games and stuff. And they had a whole wall of the miniatures. The little, their Grenadier was the company, I think, that made the little yellow box with the cool cover. I'll show it to you. I don't have a copy of it specifically, but I got a picture of one. These little the lead miniatures. Oh, they're lead. I don't know if they might have been pewter back then. Somebody said they weren't until like the mid-'80s they switched to pewter. They said no, they were lead back then. I don't know if that's true, but I got my dad to buy me a set of those miniatures. I know it was, I want to say it was the Lizard Men box. I don't think it was player characters. I know it was a monster box. Could have been Orcs and Goblins. I can't remember exactly. But I had a set of those, and oh, I love that. I remember they're $7 too. Kind of pricey at the time. They were $7 for those sets. Came with I think 10 or 12 miniatures, little guys. And they're talking about, oh, they got paints. You can paint them and stuff like that. But I didn't get into that right away. So I think I ended up getting a second box. I only had like maybe 3 of those boxes. I don't know how many there were exactly, but I still haven't played the game yet. Now, let's fast forward to the 1982, the winter of 1982 specifically. My dad, I don't know if he started this year or started the year before, but when he'd do his income tax and he'd get his income tax return, he'd give me like $20. And $20 was a lot of money in 1981, 82. He'd give me $20 on income tax day. It wasn't my birthday, it wasn't Christmas, but I'd get $20 or thereabouts. If I needed a little bit more, give me a little more. And we used to call it Fold Day, I believe, or Fold a Day. The reason I think it's Fold Day is because I think my dad at one point came home, sat down in the chair, had like he had cracked open his beer, and he's like, oh man, it was a full day today. And for some reason that stuck in my head, and so I kept calling the day I get like extra money when it wasn't my birthday was Full Day. And I thought it was Fold Day, but that doesn't really make any sense. But anyways, it was Full Day in 1982, and he says I can spend $20. So we end up going to, I want to say we went to Lakeside Mall, to the KB toy store in Lakeside Mall, which is kind of weird because normally we'd go to Kittyland, we'd go to like JK Toys, KB toy store in Meadowbrook Mall, but no, we went to the one out in Lakeside. I think my sister was with us and she wanted to go to the mall or something. And I wanted to get the basic set, the red box. It wasn't the red box, but it was the basic set at the time, the original one, not the original one, but the. Anyways, and then I ended up getting it, and the thing was they also had an expert set, so I figured I'd get them both. They're $9.99 a piece. I wanted both. My dad started this weirdness, and I don't know if my sister had something to do with this or it was my dad's idea, but they said, I'd really like to see you get a microscope. Okay, for what? Is it going to instantly make me smart or something? Dad just wanted me to get a microscope, and the microscopes, they were, toy, sort of real microscopes. They sold them in a toy store, like in the Smart Kid section. And technically, I think the Dungeons and Dragons stuff was in the Smart Kid section. But anyways, I think it was called the Hobby section. But anyways, I was like, okay, it was $9.99 for this microscope. And I'm like, but I want the 2 Dungeons and Dragons sets. get the one Dungeons and Dragons set and get the other, get the microscope. Eventually, I guess that was what I was going to get, so no matter how much I pleaded. So I got the basic set and I got a microscope, which I really didn't use at all. Waste of money. I could have said the expert set. But anyways, mine's long gone, and I'm, again, not paying crazy prices for this thing. So I did the same thing. I printed out a PDF of the, the set, and then it has, I printed the back cover, everything, the whole, so it kind of looked like the box. But there's the main book. It came with 2 books. It came with that, and it came with the module Keep on the Borderlands. And anyways, a couple of things right away that got under me. First, one thing is I started reading in the beginning. Again, I couldn't read very well, and my dad was helping me read it a little bit. But this section here with graph paper. I mean, I know about the dice because the dice came with it, and I knew you could buy dice separately. It was kind of cool. Let's move Warduke. I'm going to eventually get to toys with this because here's the new NECA Warduke. But let's, before we, we'll just be peeking right here. Before we get to him, my dice bag, Crown Royal bag. I'm not a Crown Royal drinker. I just bought the bag. I've put my dice away. Four-sided die. Most people know what this stuff is by now, I'd hope. Especially the popularity that it is right now. But it said in here, get yourself some graph paper. At this point, my love and obsession, and I'm talking obsession, with graph paper. I loved graph paper. I loved it more than notebook paper. I used to use it for everything. My teachers in school would quit using graph paper, use notebook paper. Oh, I was obsessed with graph paper. Obsessed. Obsessed with a 3-hole punch like that. I put a whole bunch of loose leaf graph paper in my Trapper Keeper. And you would draw dungeons on it. And I got obsessed drawing mazes and dungeons on that. I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. Here was a dungeon here. And it's like, oh, you number the rooms? So you know what's in the room? And then I figured out how the modules worked. And it was awesome. Still haven't played the game yet. Still learning this stuff. I drew those 2 characters, that girl and that guy. I drew them tons of time. I remember I drew them once, and my sister said, "You drew that?" And I go, "Well, I copied that out of a book." She goes, "I know, but still." Character sheet. I was obsessed with graph paper, obsessed with the character sheets. I don't know why, but I just couldn't get my mind off of them. Well, I'll show you how bad I could read back then. These are the weapons, right? And they're talking about axes, daggers, swords. And it says bows. When I was a kid, because my dad always said, I got to get some booze, I thought it said booze. And I was like, oh, you could buy booze in this game. Why? Even if you could, which you can, because you got wine skins, why would you put booze underneath axes and daggers? Not only could I not read very well, but I didn't have the internal logic to realize that's probably not where that would go in that section, even if it did. And then when you go over to here, maybe it just said water skin at the time. No, wine. No, you go 1 quart of wine, right? That's booze. goes in equipment section, or goes in whatever, standard equipment section. So, judging by the fact that I called Zodiac, and I could barely pronounce anything, getting through this stuff was a chore, to say the least. I needed lots of help. But I'm kind of trying to follow. Oh my God, it's 25 minutes already. I'm kind of trying to follow this book. My friend got me this book a few years ago for, I think it was a birthday. That was Christmas. Maybe it was a birthday present. And it was a great book. And I'm kind of going to use this going forward as my, because everything, they've kind of laid everything out. I'm not going to get into the history of Dungeons & Dragons. And I'm not going to go through, a product by product, summary of it. So if you don't know about Dungeons & Dragons and you want to learn the history of it, this book, you can get it on Amazon. It's kind of pricey. $50 book. I think you can get it on sale for like $29.99. But anyways, get this book. It pretty much goes through the history of Dungeons and Dragons. You know, goes through the whole thing. There's a picture of Stranger Things. You know, I don't know if anybody remembers E.T. It happened. They were playing an E.T. That was a thing. They start with the original chainmail, and they go through all the way up to whenever this book was published, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. All the different editions. So this is kind of when I don't have pictures, and again, I don't want to keep going to the screen. I'd rather just show you these pictures, just because I'm still getting used to this video thing. But you know, it's something, when I refer to something, there's those miniatures I was telling you about. There's the little boxes that they had. You know, they've all got it laid out here and pretty much in order. Oh, I really wanted this as a kid, but I never got it. This little digital game. It was like a pocket D&D game. E.T. Mazes and Monsters with Tom Hanks. Yeah, all this stuff most people probably either already know, or, you know, if you want a delve into Dungeons and Dragons, do some digging. There's a couple of documentaries on YouTube on it. Again, this book, there's a lot of information to cover, and at 26 minutes I can't cover most of it. Like I said, this is going to be a two-parter episode. But anyways, where was I at? So back to I got this set. So I finally started playing the game towards the end of third grade with kids at school. We'd stay in for recess. The teacher, she's like, well, you only have to stay in for recess when it's raining out. And I'm like, yeah, but we want to play this game. We don't want to play outside. We want to use the table. So then she wanted the classroom to herself to get some time. Didn't want to have to supervise us. So she kind of shuffled us off to the media center, the library. So we ended up playing it down in the library. I'm not gonna, like I said, not gonna name names. About 3 of us would go down there and play it, you know. And I pretty much that was one of the, it was one of the first things before G.I. Joe, before He-Man, before you know, a lot of the 80s toys that I'm talking about. Dungeons and Dragons really spoke to me. Yeah, I mentioned all the sets and stuff, the miniatures, graph paper. You know, like I said, the Rochester Public Library was huge for it. And then I remember I ended up going down to the library and ended up playing it. And again, they kind of shuffled us off into a little room to play because, you know, they had like an arts and like a special conference room, and they put us in there because we're making too much noise, laughing and giggling and carrying on. So we couldn't really play out in the main part of the library. So I'm gonna tell you a couple more things, then we'll call it there. So I've covered pretty much up to 82. I've got kind of a few blocks here in my notes. That's 82. I'm gonna start like the 83, 82, end of 82, 83, probably tomorrow. And I'll get into like the action figures, which again, this is a new version, a very good version of one of my favorite figures of that time. I don't have any of the old ones. I wish they would come out with the old ones. I mean, I love this figure. I mean, this figure's just absolutely amazing. However, you know, I kind of want the old one too, you know. My problem with this figure, and this is my, I guess I'll touch on this before I get into my, you know, my opinions on the figures that are coming out, like this NECA one, is that there was a couple of other characters. There was a monster called the Hook Horror. I used to call him the Hooked Horror. It's just Hook Horror. He was in the Fiend Folio. I haven't even got to the Fiend Folio yet. So he was in Fiend Folio, and he was a really cool. I had the action figure, which he didn't tower over Ward Duke, but he was bigger. And I thought, well, are they just gonna do these? Or are they gonna do a bunch of the monster? I'd like to see them do Hook Horror. Well, they do have a RoboCop figure that's the same size, and they have an Ed 209, which is like a robot, like a bipedal robot that's, you know, about the same size as Hooked Horror should be. So, and it's like $80. It's pricey, but then they have one. So I can see NECA hopefully doing a Hook Horror. A Dragoon would be nice too. I think somebody did mention a nightmare for his horse, although I never had Nightmare as a kid. I didn't have any of the horses, and I didn't have the bronze dragon. But again, this is 1983 is when this stuff started to come out, so I'm going to get really into the LJN line and the cartoon. Everybody knows about the cartoon, so I'll get started to get into that stuff. But for now, let's stop at the end of '82. Yeah, I'll get into the rest of this stuff. I'm hoping I can wrap this up by tomorrow. I hope I don't have to go into another episode, the third episode. Like I said, Dungeons & Dragons is big, so, this, and when I start getting into comic books and Marvel Comics, it's going to go a while, too, because that's probably it might be number one, number two, it's right there. It's one of the big three of things that really influenced me as a kid. So, let's call it there. I'll put all my toys away, my D&D stuff. And then we'll pick it up tomorrow. All right, talk to everybody then. Take care. Bye-bye.